One man. Goodbye. Hello, Heisman.
20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, 45. There goes Davis. Oh, my God. Davis is going to run it all the way back. Auburn's going to win the football game.
They give it back now to the 30. They're down to the 20. All the base is out on the field. He's going to go into the end zone.
Four-man Alabama rush. Got him. No, they didn't. Oh, my gracious.
Yep.
How about that?
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to another edition of the Three Technique, the college football podcast at the intersection of the X's and O's and the Jimmies and Joes. It's a Trey and Garrett show as Mitch returns from a well-deserved vacation. Garrett, we are sitting here March. The calendar's turned to March. I had in my notes to look up the exact number of days we had until week 0, but I forgot to do that. That's on me, my bad. But what I do know is we are still a few months away. But it's a good time to kind of transition and look ahead to 2026. And we have a great topic tonight to do that with our coaching carousel. So a lot to break down. The one thing I do know about today's calendar, Garrett, is we're recording this on Monday, March 2nd. It is Texas Independence Day. So shout out to all of our fellow Texans out there. Any big thoughts to share with the people as we celebrate 190 years since we told the Mexicans to just get on out of the Alamo?
Hey, Texas are Texas. All hail that mighty state. How about that? No, obviously it's a fun day, in the education world, right? So, I got to kind of talk about that with my students a little bit. So, yeah, it's good. It's a fun day. And my mom was wearing her pin. I guess she was in high school when the 150 happened. So she has a little Texas pin that she got from that. She wears it every year when that happens. So that's kind of fun. So yeah, nice little time for us folks here in Texas. And for the rest of y'all that are over here, listening to this and saying that this is obnoxious because we're just Texans talking about Texas. How about make something fun in your own state? Okay, let's go get a little antagonistic with it off the bat.
Enjoy your flag not legally being able to be as high as the American flag.
Yeah, that's right.
State was not a country.
I'm sorry. Is your capital as tall, nay, taller than the U.S. Capitol? Buzz off, buddy.
Well, and before the history nerds jump in, I do know that it was the Texans in the Alamo. We were not telling the Mexicans to get out of the Alamo, but the point stands. It was a big time. Yeah, we're going to talk about a lot of teams tonight. I can't even remember I don't think we have any in the state of Texas, ironically, other than ones that got their coach poached, unless I'm just missing some off the top of my head. But
no, a lot of stability in the state of Texas, which is kind of nice.
Yeah, it's been pretty chill. There were some rumors going around for quite some time about a couple schools. There were some schools that decided to maybe controversially hold on to a coach that probably should have been.
I was going to say maybe there were a couple teams that should have gotten rid of their coach, and they should be on this list tonight.
Well, but I can't really blame them, honestly. And, if you are a school, we'll just come out and say it. Baylor was a big controversial one.
Yeah.
There were some other schools around the country that you're kind of like, okay, like it's probably time on your respective coach, but I don't really blame them for saying like, hey, maybe not this year to jump into the fray. Maybe we just kind of take one more year, see what the old ball coach can do, and jump into a less chaotic coaching carousel. Because Garrett, that can be our transition here. It was a coaching carousel for the ages, from the Lane Kiffin drama that we'll talk about in just a little bit to just the sheer number of massive jobs opening up to it extending well beyond the typical window with some late firings and goings on up in Michigan. It was absolutely insane. And it kind of got overshadowed by the expanded playoff and how deep the playoff was going. But it was nuts nonetheless.
Yeah, I feel like as we go through this list, and hopefully our listeners appreciate this, but as we go through this list, probably a lot of y'all are going to be like, oh, wait, that job opened up? Wait, he went where? Because I know for me, going through and doing a lot of the research on this list and kind of trying to figure out who had gone where and who had settled in what location, there were a lot of guys that I was like, oh, that happened? Because I just kind of was middle of the playoff and middle of talking about seeding. And also there was like the portal window kind of weirdly in the middle of all that too. So there was just a lot happening all at the end of the season, with like, kind of December and January rolling around. So, for me looking through this list, it was definitely a bit of a like, oh, I guess he's there. This would have been a fun trivia for me going into the night if I hadn't done any research on it, because you'd be asking me like, hey, where'd this guy end up? I'd be, huh? That guy left? And so, yeah, it'll be fun, but it was definitely the right year to have a coach, because the way that the market played out and some of the timing and some of the like, I feel like almost, I don't want to say fumbles, but maybe just like minor blunders or something like that. I definitely would not want to be a team without a coach in this coaching cycle.
Yeah, if you had a coach and you needed to lock down a coach, it was a great year for billable hours. It was a great year for agents. It was a great
Oh yeah,
year to be a coach that was demanding
good
an
year for Marty
extension.
Smith. I mean, it was good for him to be out there just hanging out.
Marty Smith, we'll get into that in a second, I'm sure, but he was legendary the week of Thanksgiving this year. But yeah, it was absolutely insane. This is the great thing about this episode is if it's March, we're recording this in March, like we said, other than our little Texas history lesson off the top, it's pretty evergreen. So if this is not the time of year for you to get really into college football, hey, that's okay. We're here. We'll be here when you're ready. And we will keep putting out episodes all year long. We hope that you'll stick around, but
Maybe you're currently listening to this in the pool in July, right?
maybe
That's
you
great.
are. And that's
Fantastic.
because it's still going to be very viable information, knock on wood. Of course,
Yeah, shout out
crazy
to you.
things happen all the time. And we are never
Lane
prepared for some of
Kiffin
those
is
big
no
ones.
longer the coach at LSU.
Hey, I hear there's an opening. No, I'm not going to go there.
I know where you're
There's
going. I saw
there's
the
some
same tweet.
memes about that. And again, not an evergreen content with that. But hey, let's jump in. Let's stop beating around the bush and let's jump into the coaching carousel. We have to start by calling Baton Rouge, right? We have to start with the biggest, most publicized, most chaotic, most drama filled, most Marty Smith filled hire. And that was Lane Kiffin spurning the extension offers from Ole Miss to go over to longtime rival of the Rebels, LSU. We don't have to get all the way into the drama, Garrett, because I think everybody knows by this point how this kind of played out. It was insane. It was like a male soap opera on steroids. But just zooming out from that and taking the drama aside, how do you grade this move for LSU? It was the biggest splash, but is it the best possible hire for the Bayou Bengals?
If you're grading this move, I think this is one of, if not the only, like true A+ hires of the offseason. And I say that not just because of what they needed to do, right? After they got, kind of embarrassed by Texas A&M, they fire, Brian Kelly, and they got out of the situation middle of the season, right? That can't happen. You're done. They needed to find somebody. I think they knew who they wanted from the start. I think they kind of saw the writing on the wall with Lane Kiffin and not being super happy at Ole Miss. They made a move and they went for it. And I got to respect it, because honestly, if you whiff on that, you could be in a much worse situation. Because, for as much as we give Brian Kelly crap, he's not that bad of a coach. Like, he really isn't that bad. He'll keep your program in a somewhat stable position. Just turns out for LSU, stable isn't what they want. They want to shoot for the stars. And rightfully so, right? They've had, several coaches now win national championships. Brian Kelly's the first guy in like 4 hires that couldn't pull it off. And so, for me, when I'm looking at this hire, I think this was a slam dunk for what Lane was able to establish at Ole Miss, for what he was able to kind of build up his program as. I think this is a huge thing for them. I'm really excited for LSU to see where this goes. And you'll know too, like for those who listen to the podcast and who have listened to us for any extended amount of time, we're not necessarily the biggest like Lane Kiffin as a person fans on this pod. We don't necessarily love the way that he's maybe trashed players or dealt with the fake injury thing or whatever else he does. But at the end of the day, I cannot disrespect who he is as a head coach, his ability to, put together an offense, his ability to put together a team through the portal and win through the portal. You combine that with a team like LSU, right? Just kind of the culture that's there, everything that they have going on. I think this is a really, really good hire for the LSU Tigers.
Well, I want to point people back to our first 2 episodes that we ever did on this podcast, because I don't know if you remember this, Garrett. Do you remember what the topics were on those 2 episodes?
There's good coach, bad coach.
Good coach, bad coach, essentially, yeah. So we talked about, I think that was leading up to the 22 season. We kind of did a similar coaching carousel episode, top 5 hires, and we did 5 questionable hires. And we said hey, Brian Kelly at LSU, not sold. Not sold on the cultural fit.
Yep.
Obviously, has won a lot of games in his time as a head coach at Cincinnati and uh, Notre Dame. I don't know why that was
Yeah.
blanking from my memory, but
You're
obviously he had
you're thinking
won.
through the conferences and you couldn't find them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a time where he had won a ton of games. It was a huge splash hire, obviously. But we looked at the cultural fit and we were like, don't see it. Are already faking accents at basketball games when you're getting introduced, has a short fuse and is going to have to manage that donor base. We straight up said we didn't think that Brian Kelly was going to succeed at LSU. And yes, he did win the SEC West one time. He did have some bright moments, got a Heisman Trophy quarterback, but overall, obviously getting fired in the middle of year 4, not successful. I think that's fair to say. So with that being said, as the backdrop, is Lane Kiffin going to be a successful coach at Ole Miss? Is he going to fit into that culture and be able to manage all the craziness around that program?
I actually think that this is a good culture fit. Number one, just because, I mean, obviously Lane has connections through the South, right? Like he's been doing it at Ole Miss. He was doing it with, Tennessee. He was at Bama for a while. Like he's got connections through the South. He's been here. He understands what it's like down in the SEC. So I think for one thing, that's it. But I think everyone also kind of understands that LSU is a different type of thing. And one of the comparisons I've been saying, and I hope that LSU fans don't take this the wrong way, so hear me out for a second. I think it makes sense because they're both kind of the bad guy. And I don't mean it in terms of like LSU are just the villains or they're evil or something like that. But like LSU's always kind of had that mean streak to them. Their fans get a little bit crazy at the games, and you don't just walk into, I mean, come on, you call it Death Valley, right? Like there's a certain mean streak to it. And I think I say that in an endearing way, right? This is definitely a good thing for y'all. It's an intimidating place to play. And when you see the purple and the gold across from you, it definitely intimidates people. And so you combine kind of what LSU has been, sort of just kind of that, nasty attitude, with a guy in Lane Kiffin who he's not afraid to do what it takes either to win. And he's definitely pissing people off with who he is. And he's definitely willing to go out there and just kind of be himself. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, but that's fine. I think it kind of fits because I think they both kind of have the same mindset of like, I'm going to win. I'm going to go poke you in your eye if I have to win. Like, I don't care what I got to do. I'm going to make it work. I think it's a great fit. Now, like, is the hot yoga scene in Baton Rouge incredibly good? Hand over my heart, I don't know. Like,
we're gonna have to get
haven't
some
been
boots
to,
on the ground to
yeah,
figure that
I've
out.
been to Baton Rouge a couple of times, have not done hot yoga in Baton Rouge. I'm trying to rack my brain and think, like, when I was going to Chimes, like, was there a place across the street that also had like hot yoga? I don't know. Maybe it's a thing. But it's, I don't know. But I don't think that, like, from just like a who he is, like, he doesn't strike me as like very Louisiana, but I think that the mindset is there. And I think that they're both kind of in a similar way, just very willing to do anything it takes to win, put together an absolute juggernaut of a Death Star of a team, right? Just to make sure that this thing is going to find its way to another championship. I think it's honestly a great culture fit.
I think Lane is a guy that can mold himself to be the fit that he needs to be in a specific situation, right? Like, he was great for Ole Miss. He was very endearing to that fan base until he wasn't. He was great at other stops, right? When he is the guy and when you give him control, I think that he has every ability to kind of mold himself in a way that Brian Kelly was kind of trying to, but just didn't have the authenticity to back it up. And now listen, don't hear what I'm not saying. I'm not saying that I think Lane is an authentic person, but I think Lane has the personality skills that Brian Kelly just absolutely.
He's extremely charismatic, whereas Brian Kelly's kind of a potato.
Brian Kelly just kind of comes across as an angry little man that is frustrated that he's not getting his way or somebody else has an opinion. And Lane Kiffin, I think, does a better job of managing that when there's conflict and figuring out how to get the ducks in a row around the program. So all the on the field stuff, I think, is going to be great. I think you're going to see a fantastic offense. I think you're going to see, a lack of boneheaded coaching decisions that maybe started to become characteristic of late stage Brian Kelly. I don't think that there's necessarily going to be holes in the roster as Lane Kiffin utilizes the portal really well and has a very advanced scouting mechanism for the transfer portal. I also think, with that talent acquisition, I think he's going to be fine. LSU is
Yeah.
never going to be hurting for talent. What I will say, my one concern for LSU fans, though, is if he was going to leave and cheat on pretty much every job he's ever had, he's always been looking for the next job. What makes you think you're going to be any different? And I know the answer to that from LSU fans is that we're LSU, baby. Like we can win with almost anybody. They had the stat with every coach winning a national championship until they didn't with Brian Kelly. But hey, we are a prime big time program. And to that I will say that's fantastic. What happens when Ohio State calls?
Right.
What happens when an NFL job calls? What happens when he just gets bored and wants to go to Twitter and tweet cryptic things? And then you have a twinge of your fan base that will not handle that well. So
yeah,
I think that Lane having some very toxic personality traits mixed with a fan base that is not known for being the most stable. Garrett, I don't think that any LSU fan could try to convince me otherwise. It's not a matter of if, but when there are some fireworks here. And now that could mean that they still win national championships, plural. But there will be fireworks, and it will be very, very entertaining for rival fan bases at some point.
And on that note of like maybe leaving, because the saying is, if she'll cheat with you, she'll cheat on you, right? So
absolutely,
look, it's kind of, if I'm looking anywhere, I'm maybe looking at Tuscaloosa and saying, hey, that's a place where he's been. I know that obviously not a coaching hire to be made there quite yet, but people aren't exactly happy over there. And if it's a couple seasons later and he still isn't doing anything in the playoffs over there as DeBoer, that could be the job that comes calling. And as much as LSU would want to say like, hey, like we're LSU, it's like, well, I mean, I get it, but like Bama's still Bama until they're not. Like the rest of the college football world can sit here and say, and I'll make the case of it too, that Bama's not quite as dominant as they were, but Bama's still Bama until they're not. So like the Bama title, the Bama name, all that stuff, like that's still a thing. And that's not to disparage anything about LSU. Like I think LSU is an incredible program. I think they've done incredible things, and coach after coach, like you were saying, they win. That might just be a little bit crazy. The one thing I will say about kind of the emotions and the fireworks and all of that, it could be a disaster, right? Like I think we all acknowledge like this could get really bad where like he's yelling at the media's yelling at him. You got radio shows, saying all sorts of stuff about him, and then he's like shooting stuff off on Twitter and pictures and everything else. It could also be like that one couple. I feel like everyone kind of knows that couple where like they're both kind of toxic, but they just kind of work together. And so it's like, well, there's no real reason why this couple should work. And like probably behind closed doors, they yell and say like unnecessary things to each other, but like it just ends up working out and they're happy. And it's just like this insanely cool relationship. That could also be what's happening here. It could be, to steal the line from High School Musical, it could be the start of something new, right?
Well, let's call our shots here. Do you think Lane will win a national championship at LSU?
Yeah, I do. I think he's going to win a championship at LSU. In fact, the only way that I think this is incorrect is if the answer is no, he does not win a championship. He wins multiple championships. I think Lane Kiffin has his situation with Ole Miss might be a true, like both teams had it, for the better by the end of it. But I think with more resources, with the portal ability that he has, with the natural talent that just is in that state, all those Louisianimals and their ability to just kind of get it done in state, combine that with portal, getting anybody that he probably wants after the first couple of years, getting to prove this program. Yeah, I think, we've seen Alabama fall off a little bit. We've seen, maybe, Texas, Georgia, some of those teams not quite live up to standards. A&M and Oklahoma, they both made the playoff this year. Ole Miss made the playoff this year. So like you got programs that are up there at the top right now. I think Lane Kiffin can boost LSU above all of them and win at least a championship, if not more.
At the risk of being a hot take artist, I'm going to say no.
Okay.
Because, and I'm not saying that he won't have a championship caliber team. I think more often than not he will. But his best team at Ole Miss, he left them right in the middle of a championship run. So
it's a great point.
I mean, who's to say there's not going to be somebody offering him just an insane contract for $18 million a year or something like that?
Dips on his team in the national championship game, just like, oh, they just called, they want me. So
until we get the calendar fixed, until we figure this out, like that's still going to be hanging over the head, and he's going to leverage that every single time. So
Well, one question that might be worth it is he going to stay at LSU long enough to survive Cignetti's retirement from Indiana? Because I don't know if Indiana's ever losing another football game for the next decade until he retires. So maybe that's the real question: is just can anybody win a championship as long as Indiana's doing their thing?
It's a fair question. It's a fair question based on what we saw in the field. But I'm going to say no. I'm going to take the contrarian take.
That's
We
fair.
were right about Brian Kelly. We're split here on Lane Kiffin. I've always said with Lane, I got to see that he can win the big one before I believe it. And I just think I think all the on-field stuff is there, man, but I just think there's too much drama that will ultimately get in the way. Let us know what you think. Let us know in the comments. Will Lane Kiffin be successful at LSU? Will he win a national championship at LSU? Let us know in the comments on Spotify, on YouTube, wherever you are finding this content. Garrett, let's go to the other side of the Lane Kiffin drama for our next one. And we got to ask the question, is Ole Miss better off with Pete Golding? Because obviously I think a lot of people counted them out when Lane Kiffin left. Yes, they were going to be in the college football playoff. Yes, they were like 98% likely to win their first round game against Tulane. But after that, it was going to be just a bloodbath against Georgia. Georgia was just going to waltz right into the semifinals against a coachless Ole Miss team. And then Pete Golding had Ole Miss a sniff away from playing for a national championship with how close that game ended up being, not just with Georgia where they won, but in the semifinal as well. So I think it's fair to ask the question, is Pete Golding a great fit for Ole Miss? And, being someone that is going to stick around, it looks like, and build a program for the long term if he keeps winning, is that a better situation for Ole Miss?
He's won 2 playoff games, and Lane hadn't won any yet. So, I mean, probably the answer is an obvious yes, right? Look, I wrote this down too. I mean, Ole Miss, Lane Kiffin 1-2 against Georgia, 0-4 against Bama, and he was 1-1 against other teams ranked in the top 5 when he played them. Their last win, or their only win, really, I guess, was last season against number 4 LSU, and we can roll our eyes at what number 4 LSU really meant at the time. But that's just kind of how those games ended up working themselves out. Look, I think Pete Golding is a very good hire for this team. I think it's a very good hire. I think it was a smart hire when they did it. I think to keep everything in-house, to try to do the whole chip on a shoulder thing and see if they can make a run. I think it clearly worked. I mean, they were like an errant pass, like on the last drive away from winning that football game and playing in the national championship. And not to say that like it was an obvious pass you should have made that. Like, I'm not saying that. Like, it was well covered. It just was a little overthrown. But look, I mean, end of the day, this is a really good hire. I think he's a really good coach. I think he clearly showed that. I mean, it's funny to think that he will enter his first full season with Ole Miss having been with Ole Miss as the head football coach in these semifinals. Like, that's kind of funny to think that, like, oh, we got our new coach, the guy from last year that brought us almost all the way to the pinnacle. I think it's a really good hire. I think that Ole Miss, it's hard to say better off. I know we're being a little bit provocative with the wording there, but I do think that there is something to be said about bringing in a coach who can get the most out of your players, kind of get that chip on his shoulder, right? Because the reality for Ole Miss is even when Lane Kiffin was there, they probably weren't going to pull in like top 5 to top 10 talent classes every year, right? It's just not really what Ole Miss can draw. I know, especially with like some of the NIL commitments and stuff like that, some of the things that Lane was complaining about when he left. That's not going to be a reality, right? Like, as much as we love Trinidad Chambliss, he was not, 5-star, highly heralded, and then we developed him type of guy. He was a really good talent evaluation plus development plus system, right? So when you have a guy like that, you can kind of say you got a little bit of hunger there, right? You're coming up from the lower levels. You got some hunger to prove yourself. Plus you're talented. Plus you can do it. Plus a good system and the entire rest of it. Like, that's where you start to succeed. And I think if you can continue to get that from Pete Golding saying like, hey, keep that chip on your shoulder. They don't believe in us. They don't think we can, but I know that we can, right? Kind of go like us versus the world type of thing. I think that's where Ole Miss probably succeeds the most, is when they got their back against the wall. Nobody thinks they can do it. And then they go out there and they punch you in the face and they show like, hey, we're actually a pretty dominant SEC team. Doesn't have all to do with Lane Kiffin. It actually is just kind of who we are.
I think this offseason is going to be really telling because Pete Golding, no head coach experience, at least not at this level, right? I think it's going to be really difficult for him to make the transition to managing a program the size of Ole Miss without any real huge experience to draw back on. Now, I will say he did a fantastic job keeping everybody on the same page through that playoff run because there was so much chaos. There was the former head coach trying to sabotage what they were doing by being squirrely with when his assistants could be in person, when they could be in meetings, all that stuff. It was just a mess, and he managed it really, really well. And like I said, when we were talking about Kiffin, he had him within a sneeze of playing for a national championship. But it's just different being the full-time head coach. And I know that Golding knew that he was going to have the job, but having the full offseason, having it all be your call is just very different. And some guys just can't make that jump from successful coordinator to, successful big time head coach. So it's going to be really interesting. I think this season, even though they will have Trinidad Chambliss back, it looks like with, a lot of lawsuits, I guess, still to be decided there. It looks like everything's going to be okay there, and that's a firm foundation to build around. That's probably going to be worth a couple wins in and of itself. But, how much different are the offensive meetings going to be this year without Lane Kiffin kind of grounding that room? How much different are just the general vibes of the program going to be as Pete Golding tries to decide this is what I'm going to do versus what Lane tried to do, and just trying to find his own identity for the program? Year one could be really interesting with those regards. The only parallel I can think of, Garrett, is not a football one. I think it's going to our baseball team when Texas A&M lost Jim Schlossnagle to Texas, and Michael Early suddenly was just thrown into being a head man for the first time. Obviously, a lot lower, fewer eyeballs on a college baseball program than an SEC football program. But even then, it was pretty obvious that there were a lot of struggles and things that he needed to figure out that he was just trying to learn on the job. We'll see how that turns out in Texas A&M. But for Ole Miss, I think that there could be some growing pains in 2026.
Sure. And I think a lot of Ole Miss fans probably acknowledge that it may not be a perfect transition, but as long as he can keep them competitive and towards the top, it should be okay. I think the thing that I would really be excited about is, even though, and I was going to go the same place with that comparison, so I'm glad we're on the same wavelength at least. The one thing that I'll give him a little bit of credit for is, Jim Schlossnagle managed all the way up to that final game in the College World Series. Michael Early didn't, right? That's the when you're looking at Pete Golding, like, he did take the entire playoff run, like he was able to manage that, and I think that does something not just for like, the culture and kind of what I was saying with like keeping the chip on your shoulder and all that, but I think it also gives a lot of confidence from the guys in the room that, okay, if he can manage through this situation, he can manage an off-season workout schedule, and he can manage like fall ball and making a good decision for, who's going to be our starting left tackle and all of that. Like, that's going to be something that he can manage because he was able to manage, personnel stuff coming in and out, and who's going to be here and who's not going to be here, and, who's going to be coaching this, and, kind of moving pieces around as people were leaving to head to Baton Rouge. I think he gets some credit for that. Now, naturally, there's a lot of other things that go into being a head coach, right? And you kind of mentioned some of them with like NIL and your roster construction and all the other duties of like, being the face of the program and showing up to the baseball games and making sure that you're out there to be seen for all the people and doing the radio show and, getting in front of parents when it's time to go sign that last kid to this, whatever. Like, that's all a big deal, right? That's all a huge thing that is a separate deal that he didn't have to deal with in December and January. But I do think that it's something he'll be able to handle, because I think for me, I've seen that he can do that at the high level of like the chaos of a coaching transition and still succeed. I think I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt on this one. Now, do I think that he has the same ceiling maybe as Lane Kiffin? Probably not. And I hate to say it, but probably not. But I do think he's going to do a really good job at Ole Miss. And maybe he builds the right staff, builds the right program, and he develops a little bit. And then they do have that same kind of ceiling. Right now, I think a lot of Ole Miss fans would be thrilled with a return to the college football playoff under Pete Golding.
Yeah, that would unquestionably be a successful year one. But I think you talk about the ceiling with Lane Kiffin. I think so much is made about the ceiling at LSU. You think about the ceiling at Ole Miss and what we've seen that program accomplish just in the last 10, 15 years when Hugh Freeze, I know Hugh Freeze was doing a lot of stuff that is was not okay 10, 15 years ago and is
He
probably
sure was.
more, at least on the player side, not everything. I know the comments could jump in here, but from a funding standpoint,
Right.
it's less frowned upon now. There were other things that I'm sure people will jump to point out, but
For sure.
my point is we saw when Ole Miss is able to get talent within the rules, whatever. The highs are very high, and we've now seen Hugh Freeze do it. We saw it a little bit, I guess a little bit in the in between, but especially with Lane Kiffin. I think Golden can reach the heights of having a team that's competing for a college football playoff spot. That's kind of been the ceiling for Ole Miss the last couple of years, and arguably Lane kind of held them back last year when they lost focus and were losing games down the stretch when they probably had a better team, more likely to win a national championship in 2024. So, yeah, I think long term could work out. Jury's going to still be out, but short term, I'm expecting a little bit of a rocky transition. And same quarterback or not, it's just going to be really interesting to see how Golden can take over that program and be the guy. Let's go from SEC country to Big Ten country, shall we? Because we have a couple schools here that made coaching changes under very different circumstances, but both made very good hires, Garrett. We're talking about Michigan and Penn State. Michigan, obviously all the Sharon Moore stuff that came out right at the end of the regular season this year was absolutely insane, crazy for everyone involved. And then you have Penn State, who was one of the first big programs to actually fire their coach in James Franklin so they could get out ahead of this. And then they had the most chaotic coaching search just from a sheer number of candidates that they had to bring in before eventually coming back around to Matt Campbell. Michigan hired Kyle Whittingham, semi out of retirement, I guess, from Utah. It was a weird situation how that ended there. But which one of those two programs do you think made the best hire to compete right away?
Look, Trey, this isn't necessarily a super fair question to me because I'm so biased. Not only because, yeah, I got a soft spot for Michigan and I want to kind of just believe that that's going to be okay, but also because I've had a soft spot for Utah and I really respect Kyle Whittingham and all that he's done over there. To me, the Michigan head coaching job kind of feels like the prayer at Jordan-Hare, like where your quarterback objectively throws an interception, but three guys muff it and then it just bounces accidentally into your receiver's hands so he can go score. Like, Michigan had an unforeseen, nobody could really see that coming. I mean, obviously, I think some people had an idea of what was happening and were trying to make sure that things went the correct way. Maybe some of them weren't. I'm not going to try to litigate that whole thing, but obviously, for I think the majority of the fan base, for the majority of the players, for all of that, this was out of left field. And then what happens is you get one of the most consistent, one of the best head coaches that has been doing it for 20 years at his previous stop. Who just falls into your lap and he's just interested, ready to go, and ready to kind of rock. Kyle Whittingham's a fantastic coach. You got to remember that Michigan did just win a championship a couple years ago to kick off this Big Ten dominant streak that we're currently living in. Kyle Whittingham, he's always kind of had his guys playing physical. I think that matches Michigan. I think if you could tell me that Michigan's going to come with that same sort of tough streak and attitude that Utah's been playing with, I think a lot of Michigan fans will take that one. I think ultimately they've fallen short because of elite talent issues, right? I don't think Utah has necessarily had the most elite talent. And then obviously they had some quarterback issues the last couple of years. The Cam Rising health debacle has been, front of mind for me out there with Utah. That's not really an issue with Michigan. They've got their quarterback. They've got a growing and rising quarterback in that situation. And they definitely can get the talent that they want to up there. They're talented enough. They can get the roster they need to. Obviously, the circumstances were not optimal, but if I'm looking at both situations, getting this kind of a coach versus Penn State kind of did it the right way, and they kind of tried to get out in front of the coaching cycle, fire your coach early, don't stand for it, start the process, and they were one of the last teams to hire a coach anyways because they just couldn't find the right fit, they couldn't find the right guy. Eventually, they end up with Matt Campbell, who I don't hate as a hire. I think he's going to do a pretty good job there. I would much rather be Michigan in this situation where it felt like everything fell together for them in just the perfect way.
Well, allegedly with the Matt Campbell Penn State thing, that was one of their first couple of candidates, but someone fumbled the exchange along the lines of communication between Penn State and Matt Campbell's agent. Somebody like didn't return a phone call or something like that, and it was just
Is
okay. Well, like
Are
we
you
got to
telling
move
me that
on to
this
the
is
next
like
guy.
the Notebook where like he delivered the letters and they're like your mom held him for the whole time and you got like 365? What are we talking about? This
That's
is so just like
by reports. I mean, they were just laughing about it at his introductory press conference, but
Matt
it
Campbell
makes
in
a
his
lot of
goofy hat.
sense.
What do you want?
It makes a lot of sense though, because he should have been very high on their list with what he's done at a historically
Yeah.
very difficult place to win at Iowa State. He's the only head coach that's ever won 10 games in Ames, and it's been a long time that they've been playing college football in
Mm-hmm.
Ames, Iowa. I think it's very interesting to compare these two because not only, like you mentioned, there were two very different circumstances for how they're hired, two guys that have had a ton of success at different levels of programs, right? Kyle Whittingham, Gary, pop quiz. Do you know who he took over for at Utah?
Is it Urban who
It
just
was
left?
Urban Meyer.
Yeah.
That's how
Yeah.
long that he has been the head coach at Utah. It's his only head coaching job ever. He took over in 2004 for Urban Meyer. Crazy to think about where we're at in a
Yeah.
college football space, thinking about that now he is making a jump to another school. And for Matt Campbell, he took over an Iowa State program that was maybe, not it was not the doldrums that it had been in previous years, but it wasn't necessarily in the best spot. And he really figured out a way to get the most out of talent, got some really real NFL level players coming in on, especially on the offensive side of the ball. And, he had some head coach experience before at Toledo, but it was certainly his first big time job. But all that being said, these are two guys that have been entrenched at their current positions for a long time. They're making this jump to the Big Ten, and they both have very interesting carryovers to talk about. Jason Beck is coming over with Kyle Whittingham from Utah. I think that's going to be a fantastic offensive coordinator to
Mm-hmm.
maximize the talents that he has in Bryce Underwood. I think Bryce Underwood has a lot of the same skill set as what we saw of Devin Dampier this year and so many other quarterbacks that Jason Beck has kind of um, tutored at Utah. And then you have Matt Campbell bringing over most of his roster from Iowa State that still has eligibility to come up and be the
Yeah.
Penn State Fighting Cyclones. So it's going to be really interesting year one. Now, longevity wise, I'm wondering if Kyle Whittingham is just a short-term stable decision to stabilize for a few years and maybe kind of similar to what Utah did, start to bring up a head coach in waiting under him. I think that's maybe the ideal situation. I know Kyle says he has a lot of years left under him. He is getting up there in age. He's been a head coach for over 20 years. Matt Campbell, younger guy, still in his 40s. I think long term, I'm probably buying more Penn State stock, but that doesn't mean that I don't think Michigan is going to be successful under Kyle Whittingham. They're going to win 8, 9, 10 games every year that he's the head coach there. I'm pretty sure. But
Yeah.
long term, I think Matt Campbell, given the resources that Penn State has, given what he's done with lesser resources, he could build an absolute monster in Happy Valley.
Oh yeah, I think the way that this is interesting to me between these two teams is I think Michigan definitely has the more like. I think if you were to tell me like if I gun to my head I got to pick one of these teams to make the playoff this year, I'm picking Michigan because I believe in the talent more. I believe in Kyle Whittingham to get to that. Like we've seen Kyle Whittingham in the Rose Bowl, like we've seen him coach at that super high level. I think that can still happen at Michigan. For me, Matt Campbell is really interesting because he's. I almost wonder and I don't know exactly how to phrase this, but so I wrote some of this down in the notes. Iowa State had 6 seasons of 7+ wins since 1979 up until he took over, and he did it every year except 2. But there were only like a couple of those years that were like really elite years. There were just a lot of like very good football seasons in there as well. Penn State fired James Franklin for not being able to get over the hump and get to that elite level. And I almost wonder if this isn't just like, okay, we're going to just try something else because we have to. Like, I understand. And I think we even made this comparison back when it happened. But like when you fired James Franklin, that could have been, similar to when Georgia went out and hired Kirby Smart, right? Was where they said, okay, we're going to fire a good coach to get the great coach. I don't think that they got the great coach in this situation. I think Matt Campbell's a very good coach, and I think he can build a good program. But Penn State doesn't want to be a very good program that ends up like fourth or fifth or sixth in the Big Ten. Like, they wanted to compete. That was the expectation this year. We were all talking about in the offseason. Like, this is Penn State's year. This is the year for them. If it's not going to happen this year, it's never going to happen for Penn State. Well, it didn't happen this year. And so I don't know. I don't know exactly where this program goes. I almost wonder if this is just going to be a very good. Now, maybe with more resources, we start to see more out of Matt Campbell. Obviously, like, what Iowa State was maybe not able to necessarily give everything that he was able to use. So maybe with some more resources, some more money, give him a wideout once a year, like that might be really good for him. I just don't know for sure that he's going to be able to bring them to that elite level. I think that they'll be good consistently for a while. I just don't know that that's what their fans want.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think if you look at the year by year record for Matt Campbell, right, there's some good, like you said. There's a couple years, where they're playing in New Year's Six or New Year's Six adjacent bowls. I would say 2020 they went to the Big 12 championship game, went to the Fiesta Bowl and won it, and then 2024 the Pop-Tarts Bowl after falling short in the Big 12 championship. So those are the high points. The in between is a little bit of a mixed bag. I agree, but he's overachieving more often than not. And I think those big drop off years. The one unforgivable year for me for Matt Campbell was 2021. You're fresh off of playing for a Big 12 championship. You have your quarterback coming back in Brock Purdy. You have Breece Hall running the rock, and you go 7-6. That was a red flag, and that was honestly when a lot of people were saying, "Hey, Campbell, you probably should have jumped ship after that."
Yeah, but point. How good is Brock Purdy and Breece Hall anyways? I mean, those guys aren't like bona fide NFL starters, are they?
Yeah, I mean, who's to say? I think Brock Purdy was Mr. Irrelevant. Like, he's obviously not going to amount to anything. But anyways, I think that he more often than not overachieves. And I'm really excited to see what he can do with the resources because he's not going to have those reload years, right? Those rebuild years, I should say. He's going to be more often if he's able to work the portal better than James Franklin did, which I don't think is setting a necessarily super high bar. I know James Franklin got some talent, and we were I was excited about the wide receiver core he brought in this offseason through the transfer portal, and I know Mitch was too. I think that if you can clear that bar, you're in good shape to not have those rebuilding years, and that's going to be key for him to sustain success. But both of these guys, Garrett, are going to be players in the Big Ten. I'm really excited to see,
and it's going to keep the Big Ten extremely competitive, which is the good point. Like, we obviously have like Ohio State's great, and Indiana's great, and Oregon's great, and like there's some teams at the top that are obviously fantastic. But being able to let like Michigan and Penn State stay at the top and not watch them just fall off because coaching situations, I think it's going to be really good for the conference. And it's going to be great for college football since we're going to have so many good matchups week in and week out up north in the Big Ten.
Yeah, I'm right
or
there
out
with
west.
You. Yeah, or out west, not necessarily up north anymore. Garrett, let's go back down south and rapid fire a few of these. We have some, more under the radar SEC names, especially when you compare it to the Lane Kiffin saga. Kentucky hired Will Stein, Oregon's offensive coordinator. You and I talked about the portal class he put together a few weeks ago. Go back and watch that video. If you're a Kentucky fan, you're going to be really excited about what he's doing. This work speaks for itself when he was Oregon's offensive coordinator, right? They had some electric offenses. If you can get some quarterback talent down there, look out. Florida, once it seemed like they were out on Lane Kiffin, they kind of zeroed in on John Sumrall from Tulane. Very interesting backstory there when you think about the context of that program. Alex Golish at Auburn coming up from South Florida after a huge season there. And then Ryan Silverfield coming over from Memphis to be Arkansas's head coach after beating the Hogs this year on the field. So all four of those guys, none of them have Power 4 head coaching experience. In the case of Will Stein, no head coaching experience in college football. If you had to buy stock, and we can kind of break these guys down one by one, kind of rapid fire them here soon, but I'm going to put you on the spot and tell you have to buy stock in one of those guys. Who are you picking?
Just because I think I can get good return off of buying low, I think I would buy Alex Golish at Auburn. And that might be maybe the controversial pick here because I don't think it's necessarily as flashy of a name as some of the others. I think Will Stein is not so much a best kept secret anymore. I think people have kind of caught on to the Kentucky hype train, and rightfully so. I mean, he's doing some big things. His offenses, I wrote this down, second, 17th, and 12th in scoring offense under him. Had a couple guys make a Heisman ceremony, so that's kind of nice. But I think he's going to have things rolling in Kentucky. But I think if you're just going to tell me like futures and like where people maybe not super optimistic right now, let's go down to Auburn for a second. Auburn, I think I've thought this for a long time. I still think it's true. Probably the toughest job in the country. Your permanent rivals, like your historic rivals that your fan base has to watch you play every year, that's Alabama and it's Georgia. That sucks. That I'm sorry, there's just no other way around it. You picked like two of the best teams, and up until extremely recently, like two of the best coaches in the whole country. Bama might be cracking a little bit. Maybe there's a chance to go in and like kind of build up some momentum if you're Alex Golish and kind of build some stuff. And the thing that makes me believe he can do it is with a team like South Florida, who, again, no offense to the Bulls, but they're not going to have the same talent level that a lot of these Power 5 teams are going to end up, or Power 4 teams are going to end up with. They've been stronger the last few years. They knocked off Florida last year. Not a very good Florida team, but they beat them. They lost a couple of conference games this last year by 6 combined points. So they're playing real competitive in those. Couple of years in a row, they played Bama really, really close until the very end. They finished one of those games real close. And, of course, the other one kind of got out of hand towards the end. Bama ran up the score just a little bit. But they'd played teams at a high level that, kind of play at this level, and they had jumped up to meet them. You give me some of Auburn's like ability to pull talent, some of Auburn's like, SEC roster and all that stuff. And you tell me you get to go get a chip on your shoulder team like that. And you get Alex Golish in there to kind of just like fire him up. I think this could be like a sneaky good hire where, maybe the first couple of years, we're not talking about a playoff team, but we're talking about a team that, is making a bowl game. Maybe a team that is, going out and getting into a good bowl game, maybe a Florida bowl game even. But I don't know. I think he could be really good here. Not as big on the Summerall or Silverfield hires at Florida or Arkansas. Not as big on those. So I really like Golish in this situation. I think he's going to do a good job at Auburn.
Yeah, I think especially year one, he has a good chance bringing up Byron Brown, right? And
sure,
making sure that he is going to hit the ground running. That's going to be really important. I think Auburn fans in general are just going to be thrilled to have competent quarterback play no matter what system they're running. I'm buying stock in Will Stein. We've talked enough about him on this show. I think that, maybe it's not a ton of wins in year one, but he's putting together an awesome portal class. Kentucky's a place you can win, man. And it's really sad how Stoops just kind of burned that program to the ground on his way out, in spite of having really good players that were competitive and making games really interesting, even when the team as a whole wasn't very good and the coaching staff was not putting them in good position. So I'm buying all the Will Stein stock. I'll tell you who I'm selling though, Garrett. Ryan Silverfield at Arkansas. Arkansas is a team that I think should have waited another year to not be just this far down the pecking order. I know it was rough with Sam Pittman. I know. It was so bad. But if you weren't going to go with Bobby Petrino, and he didn't really earn the right to have the head coaching job with how he served as the interim, he provided a spark for a little bit, but didn't really,
didn't
give them what they needed. He didn't nail the audition. I think he was given every opportunity to nail the audition. He didn't.
I think they wanted to hire him.
They did. I think they really did, and he just didn't go and take that job. You go and hire Ryan Silverfield, who I know beat you head-to-head by grasping victory from the jaws of defeat this year. But, man, that Memphis program has just really underachieved in the American. They have all the resources they need. They have more funding than probably half that conference combined. And they just haven't been able to win the conference title under Ryan Silverfield. Like, they just cannot get it done. I know injuries have been a problem at times, but if it's not injuries, it's something else getting in their way. And I don't see it working better than the highs that they had under Sam Pittman. I think the highs they had under Pittman are going to be higher than the highs under Silverfield.
Wow. I it's hard for me because like I think that he will do a little better than Pittman, but I
On
don't think he
average, he
does
might.
that
On
much
average,
better.
he might. He might not have as
Yeah,
low lows as Pittman had,
right.
but I don't think he's going to have the high as Pittman.
Which that's fair. The thing for me is I don't think he's that strong of a coach. I do think that Memphis has done better than most people probably I think nationally recognize. They just couldn't quite get over the hump, right? You know, I think we're not saying that Memphis has been a bad team the last couple of years. It's not like they're
No.
just this terrible program and whatever. Like they just haven't quite been able to reach that level to where I think you would want to say, hey, I mean, like if you look at Florida, they hired John Summerall. You know, he was at Tulane, he was at Troy. They were putting up big numbers. Like Tulane just made the playoff, right? That's a whole thing. I think Arkansas could have gone for something a little bit more aggressive there. I might have would have liked to see him go for like a coordinator at a bigger program and see if he can't grab somebody else's guy. Honestly, we'll talk about him in a second. I think they really should have taken a bigger swing at Eric Morris. I think that probably could have been an opportunity for them. But I think if you're looking at the strategy here, I think the idea is okay, like Silverfield's coming over from Memphis. That is regional. Like Memphis is, you know, right there on the border with Arkansas, pretty close. This is a somewhat regional pick. You have some strength at least to keep some guys home, maybe start winning some of those recruiting battles, maybe, you know, reaching into Tennessee a little bit, starting to grab some guys. So maybe that's the direction you try to go, and you hope that some relationships get built there. I don't know, man. To me, it kind of felt like if you can't beat them, hire them away, right? Like that's kind of what that felt like to me. I don't love it. I also don't really love the Summerall pick. I know we just mentioned him. Like he did a really good job at Tulane. He did a really good job at Troy. To me, it seems like, you know, again, like a strong regional pick, right? He's got experience in the Southeast. You know, does it scale to the SEC? It kind of feels like we're doing the same thing we did with Billy Napier, and I don't want to be that guy. Like, I don't want the Florida fans to come and hate me, but like, can't we see in a couple of years how this will be the Scooby-Doo meme where we run over to John Summerall and we say, all right, now let's see who was behind this the whole time, and we rip off the mask, and then it's Billy Napier, because like it's a couple of guys who did really well at G5 teams in the Southeast. Didn't really
In Louisiana.
Right, didn't really pull it off outside of it. Like, and again, like I'm not rooting against Summerall. I think he's a good coach, and I hope that he can make Florida good again. It kind of feels like the same hire. It kind of feels like you're like, no, we got it this time. Like we did the same exact thing. It'll work this time.
By all accounts, Summerall nailed his interviews, and I think that Auburn was really disappointed that they didn't get John Summerall until they hired Golish. I think Golish was a really good hire for them. But yeah, it's hard to look at it and say, yeah, we're not just starting this cycle over again. He very well could be the next awesome hire for Florida, but that's a program that's really been searching for their next Urban Meyer and has struck out way more often than it feels like they've gotten close over the last 10 years. So I'm interested to see. I think that there's a possibility that he could recruit really well. He's going to have talent, of course, and I think that from an intangible standpoint, Summerall seems way more competent than Billy Napier, of just not starting from behind because you know your coach is going to screw something up. But will he have the chops to manage a big-time program like that? I don't know. It remains to be seen. I do know that American John or Fire John chants don't have quite the same ring as Sunbelt Billy or Fire Billy. But we'll
Sunbelt
cross
Billy
that
was
bridge
really
when we get
catchy.
there.
Yeah.
Well,
American John feels like a weird superhero name or something. It's like, hey, here comes American John to save the day. Yeah, it's I don't know. It doesn't quite ring the same as Sunbelt Billy, who feels like a WWE star.
Third-rate comic book for sure. Let's go. You wrote this title. I want to get that out of the way, and this is your doing here. Who hired the next Kurt Signetti? Hashtag
parentheses, it's bait. I know it is. Like, I totally understand it's bait. I know
and if
that
you're
that's
watching this,
truth.
you clicked on the video, so thank you for that.
Yeah, it's your fault for clicking. But please stick around. We actually do have a serious conversation to have here.
So you put two guys down, and I love these two choices. It's Eric Morris coming up from North Texas to Oklahoma State and bringing most of his team with him, or Bob Chesney from JMU, going across the coast to UCLA to take over in Westwood. The floor is yours, my friend. I think that I shouldn't say the floor is yours because I do have one thing to say. I think the clear parallels, if you want to draw them, are of bringing in a ton of guys that are already familiar with your system. Point to Eric Morris going up to Stillwater, but I think Chesney, obviously, there's parallels there too with him coming over from James Madison and having that program at heights even Kurt Signetti did not reach.
Yeah, it's funny because I think both of these schools, like you were just saying, I think they're really kind of the same situation. Now, again, I'm not saying that Eric Morris or Bob Chesney are Kurt Signetti. I'm not saying either of them are going to win the national championship game in a couple of years. I guess I'm not saying that they can't. I'm just kind of saying it's probably not going to happen, and that's what we said about Kurt Signetti. And I'm happy to eat crow in a couple of years doing this podcast, doing the live show, and saying none of us thought it'd be that good. We thought they'd be good, but not this good. Like that's exactly what we did with Kurt Signetti. I'll do it again in a couple of years. But again, like you were saying, Eric Morris coming up from UNT, kind of an unknown, sort of like an under the radar move. Nobody's really taking it that serious. Oklahoma State's been kind of irrelevant in the Big 12 for a couple of years. And then here comes Eric Morris bringing in what's going to be the Oklahoma State Mean Green, right? This is what's about to happen. He brought in all of his players. Everybody's familiar with the system. They're doing the same thing again. They're just doing it in black and orange. And so I'm excited for that because I think that this is a good football team. I think once he can kind of get in, get some portal guys in, start developing his culture and all that, I think Oklahoma State can jump back up to the top, especially because a difference here is I actually think the Big 12 is probably a little bit more open to a team ascending, right? Right now, it's probably a fight for second this year with everything that Texas Tech is. And hey, maybe if Texas Tech is just going to keep spending money like it's going out of style, then it's always going to be a fight for second place in the Big 12. But at least for right now, I do think that there is a lot more of a wide open lane in the Big 12 as opposed to in the Big 10, like Kurt Signetti had to do, right? Where, you're trying to overcome Michigan, overcome Ohio State, overcome Oregon, overcome like all these big top level teams, Penn State to a certain degree as well. It's a little bit different, obviously, I think, in the Big 12. But yeah, you said, like Bob Chesney, James Madison coach, Big 10 team hires him. Sounds like a win. Sounds like a complete win to me. He made the playoff in year 2. Yeah, if you're just going to be like, all right, fine, guess what? We hadn't been very good, so what we're going to do is hire James Madison's head coach to a Big 10 team. This is good. This is exactly what you should do. This is the model. People want to say do the same thing, and they said, yes, sir. He made the playoff in year 2. That's fantastic. They were dominant pretty much all year up until they played more talented teams. Obviously, I think it was Louisville earlier in the year that they didn't exactly keep what they lost by 14, so it's not that bad, but it wasn't exactly close. They played Oregon. It wasn't like a close game, a lot of like late scoring once like some of the starters have been pulled. I will say they look better than Texas Tech did. I'll give them that much.
Right out of my mouth.
They look better than the Red Raiders. So they look better than that. Power conference who. So yeah, I don't think that either of these teams are going to win a championship in 2 years. You can write me down on that one. I know that that's like super bold. This is not even a hot take. This is like mildly warm. It's like tea that's been sitting out for a couple hours. Like it's just mildly warm take. But come on, like these are good coaches. These are good hires. I think it's going to make things really interesting. And they're definitely under the radar. Like nobody I've seen is like blowing these hires up as like big names that we should be talking about for next year.
Yeah, I think both of these guys, Eric Morris, it feels very on brand for Oklahoma State, right? You think back to all of the success that they've had over the last 20 years under Mike Gundy. The better years under Mike Gundy were high-flying offense, gunslinger quarterback, elite wide receiver play that they developed in-house. I think they can get back to that with Eric Morris, and I think that he's going to be a guy that uses what he learned at a couple different stops where it's not hard to win, but it's been more hard than it should be to win. When he was OC at Texas Tech, right? He was head coach at UNT, just a couple places that obviously it's possible to win. He was part of showing that it could, but I think Oklahoma State fits that bill as well. With UCLA, it's interesting because I wonder which of these two teams is more attractive from a talent acquisition standpoint. Like you think about who Oklahoma State has to compete with for high school recruits. They're pretty far down the pecking order. in their region. You've got Oklahoma, you've got Texas, you've got A&M, Texas Tech throwing millions of dollars around. And then you're probably starting to get into the tier with Oklahoma State, TCU, Baylor, SMU, teams like that.
Yeah.
Out on the West Coast, you can convince a kid to stay home. Maybe like that's been the biggest problem for UCLA and to a lesser extent USC the past 20 years is convincing these high-end California kids to stay home and not go to the SEC, not go to these powers in the Big Ten, not go to Oregon. So if they can figure that out, if Bob Chesney can figure that out, he could start stockpiling some serious talent at UCLA. And I think that it's going to be a really attractive portal destination too. Now, the wild card is who's going to fund their program better. And we've seen in the not so distant past, Oklahoma State has some money to throw around. They have, I know Team Boone Pickens is not with us anymore, but they have some money to throw around in Stillwater. UCLA looks like they're still trying to figure out exactly what that looks like. Then you have the whole,
and they should have the money.
Dynamic.
They just haven't been able to put it together.
Well, and you have the whole conference dynamic of flying coast to coast for a Friday night game in Piscataway or something like that. They can just derail the whole season. So it's very interesting. Two programs that are in very different spots. I'm betting on Eric Morris, though. I really like what he did at UNT, a place that, again, it shouldn't be hard to win, but no one won to the level that he did over his tenure there, like ever.
Yeah, I will say one maybe interesting note on this. You want to guess how old Eric Morris is?
He's young, man. He's like 35, right?
He's a man. He's
40? Oh, look at that.
40.
Well,
yeah, I looked it up just to see. I was like, are we going to get an I'm 40 moment? I'm like, oh, if it's this season, maybe. Yeah, born in 85. Yeah.
I think that was Gundy's third or fourth year.
He was a couple years in.
Yeah, so the parallels are not 100%, but how awesome would it be?
But he is a man and he is 40, so it's starting to kind of feel right. I don't know if it's feeling right to some of the Oklahoma State guys. I know I've said this a couple times. My sister, her husband, both Oklahoma State folks, they're pretty excited about this one. So
good to hear. Love that the people on the ground are excited. Garrett, we are over an hour, so let's go rapid fire through a few more here. Just give me love or hate and a quick reason why. Tosh Lapoy at Cal, the former Oregon defensive coordinator.
I absolutely love this one. He's technically the Saban tree through Kirby Smart and Dan Lanning on the defensive side of the football. Yeah, sign me up, man. I love this for Cal. It's going to be fun watching them play football.
I love it too. They need an identity there. The last defensive coach they hired, Justin Wilcox, the defense sucked more often than not. So hopefully he can figure that out. And I love that he's got a little dog in him. Cal hired a coach that had a show cause at one time. Like, give me that dog in a head coach at Cal to figure it out up there. Love what they're doing in the portal early on too. South Florida hired Brian Hartline, longtime Ohio State wide receiver coach, who then bumped up to the OC position in 2025.
I'm going to say that I love this one. Ohio State's definitely the royalty of college football. Don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing for the Bulls. Ultimately, you hire a young coach who, you've got a great offensive, scheme. He's been able to succeed with the best toys in the entire country. Can he do that without the top talent? I'm going to say I think so. And he definitely is attractive to receivers. So if you want to develop, go play for Brian Hartline. He'll get some good receivers. So maybe he can parlay that into a little bit of a winning thing. I think I like this for South Florida.
It's really going to depend on the support staff he has around him for me. And I think I'd say that about most first-time head coaches. I'm out in the sense that I think that he's going to be as successful as Alex Golish was. But I think that he can have them competitive, maybe be pushing for an American title in a couple years as he kind of gets his feet under him. So I guess, I love that he's getting his chance, but not all in on this being the spot for him to really flourish. Michigan State. This is maybe the most controversial one in the college football media space. Pat Fitzgerald, the former Northwestern coach, had a few years off after some scandals. We'll just say that. And now coming back to East Lansing to see if he can figure out how to get the Spartans back on top.
Yeah, man, I don't like this one. Like, personally, I just don't like this hire. I feel like I can actually do the Ted Lasso because, I kind of got the mustache, so it works. I can kind of do the whole, turns and the whole, like that whole the meme. I don't like this move. I just don't. I don't think that Jonathan Smith was in the room long enough to let the Mel Tucker drama air out before they hired a controversial coach. Look, it is what it is. You hired who you hired. Fitzgerald was good at times with Northwestern. He had some good seasons. So if you're trying to find a way to get back to winning, I guess that's the direction that you go. I just don't think I would have hired that coach at that time.
This could end up a spectacular just flame out. I fully admit that.
Yep.
I'm going to go on the record in March and say I'm in on Pat Fitzgerald. And I think that I'm standing relatively alone from all the podcasts that I've listened to in the early offseason here. The dude had Northwestern in the Big Ten championship game. It's a historically horrendous place to coach. And yes, he had some bad seasons. I've heard a lot of people talk about, well, he went 3-9 or whatever. Yeah, it's Northwestern, man. Like, of course he went 3-9. I know that in the post-Pat Fitzgerald era, they've had some really nice seasons and they've gone to bowl games. But Pat Fitzgerald kind of made that possible at his alma mater. So, yeah, I'm in. I think that he can figure it out. I think that he can get Michigan State at least up off the mat. Now, are they going to be competing for Big Ten titles? Probably not. But I think he can get him up off the mat.
Yeah, I don't doubt his football bona fides necessarily. I think it could be a really good hire from that perspective. I just don't like the off the field stuff specifically for Michigan State, right? I think just for Michigan State, there's very few places I think currently across this country where I would say that Pat Fitzgerald is a worse fit in terms of just kind of where the culture is right now. I just don't like it from that perspective. Objectively, he's a good football coach. I just don't. I don't know, man. I don't know.
Yeah,
I'm willing to be wrong.
It's not the best from a PR standpoint. From the university, it could have used some good PR. James Franklin, former Penn State head coach, fired, goes to Virginia Tech.
I personally love this. Like, I know that that's kind of the obvious duh. But I think the good news for him is, like, he couldn't get over the hump with Ohio State, Michigan, Indiana, Oregon, like all those teams in the way. And so what does he do? He goes to a conference where, like, there's one or two good teams maybe a year. Like, Duke just won this conference. Like, come on. We're going to be okay if we're Virginia Tech. You probably get a chance to recruit a little bit more unopposed. You get a little bit more of that Atlantic, maybe start pulling out of Virginia a little bit more. Maybe even dip into the SEC footprint a little bit. Hey, what do you know? Go get some guys from down there. And additionally to that, like, Virginia Tech has been so bad for such a good fan base too, right? Those fans show up, they care, they love their team. They just have not been able to put together a good team for a little while. I feel like the expectations are low enough right now to where, like, he doesn't have to be the elite coach in year one. His expectations last season were win the national championship game or you're fired. He got fired like shortly after, like, losing to a couple of bad teams. Look, it's not a deal breaker if he doesn't win the national championship this year. He can build a program a little bit more, and maybe it's a little bit more of a direct path. I wouldn't be shocked if we see Virginia Tech in the playoff in a couple of years.
Yeah, I'm all in on James Franklin of Virginia Tech. I think he's going to make the Hokies back up to the level that they were in the Beamer glory days and have them be playing a really exciting brand of football. Those fans deserve it. That program deserves it. They've supported some bad football over the last few years and still shown up. So I'm excited to see what he can do in Blacksburg. Garrett, there's a list of G5 coaches. I want to give those coaches some more attention. So we're going to call it right here for tonight. I'll say to our G5 friends, I know we didn't talk a ton of G5 football tonight. Promise we will at some point in some medium, either on a podcast or in an article. So be on the lookout for that. But for now, we're going to call it right there because that is over an hour of coaching carousel, and we got plenty more off season to fill up with content. Oh, yeah. So stay tuned here. Make sure that you're subscribed to the channel. If you're watching on YouTube, following along on your podcast feed of choice as well. And for Garrett Turney, for Mitch Mason, I'm Trey Reeves, and we will see you guys next time.